Is Casio folding up? Casio is closing hundreds of stores, but this is the same company that survived the Quartz Crisis, put a calculator on your wrist, and built watches tough enough to survive extreme conditions. So what is really happening? Let's find out. The rumor mill. What people think is happening. Someone sees a headline about 600 Casio employees losing their jobs. Another person sees a story about Casio exiting the Philippines. A third reads something about entire product lines being discontinued. None of these people are wrong, but none of them have the full picture either. So the stories merge, the numbers get swapped, and by the time it travels through social media, Casio is closing hundreds of stores and the brand is done. The 600 figure is especially interesting. Because 600 is real, it just does not mean what most people think it means. It is not stores, it is not products. It is people, employees who took voluntary retirement packages as part of a structural reform that Casio announced in 2025. The company booked a 7 billion yen extraordinary loss to fund it. That is not a brand in freefall, that is a company reorganizing with intention. And here is the part that gets buried every time this story circulates. While all of this restructuring is happening in Japan and Southeast Asia, Casio's sales in India and Latin America are actually growing. The brand is not contracting globally, it is pruning selectively. Those are two very different things, and the difference matters. Think about what selective pruning actually looks like in practice. A gardener who cuts dead branches is not killing the tree. They are redirecting the energy. The branches that remain get more of everything, more resources, more attention, more room to grow. That is the operating logic behind everything Casio has done since 2024, not collapse, concentration. But here is what makes the rumor understandable, even if it is wrong. Casio is absolutely closing things, just not the things people assume. What it is actually shutting down reveals a company that has looked honestly at itself, identified everything that is not working, and decided to stop pretending. That takes a different kind of courage than most brands have. The question is, what exactly did they close, and why? Because each decision tells a different part of the same story. The Philippines exit, the event that started it all. In late 2025, Casio quietly pulled out of the Philippines. Not a store closure, not a strategic pause, a full exit. The boutiques went dark, the direct operations wound down, and the regional presence that Casio had built over years, gone. The reason cited was a 65% revenue drop in that specific market. 65%. That is not a bad quarter. That is the market telling you it has moved on. Picture what 65% actually looks like on the ground. A boutique that used to move 30 units on a weekend, moving 10. Staff standing near display cases with nothing to do. Managers filing reports that headquarters already knows are bad before they read them. The kind of numbers that generate long email chains where everyone is very polite and nobody says the obvious thing. The obvious thing was, this market is done. Now, you could look at that number and see failure, but look at it differently, and it reads like information. The kind of information most brands spend years refusing to accept. Casio accepted it in one decision. The Philippines exit was not the beginning of a collapse. It was the first clean incision. The market had softened, the margins had thinned, and maintaining a direct boutique presence there no longer made sense financially. So Casio left. Not with drama, not with a bankruptcy announcement, not with a desperate clearance sale, just a quiet strategic withdrawal. What drove the revenue drop matters too. This was not a quality problem. Casio did not suddenly start making worse products. What happened was a structural shift in how Filipino consumers were buying and what they were buying. The mid-range watch market in Southeast Asia has compressed significantly as smartphone ownership has risen. Why wear a basic Casio when your phone tells the time and does 10 other things? The customer who once bought an entry-level Casio digital watch in Manila in 2018 has different habits now. Different priorities and different ways of thinking about what belongs on a wrist. Casio could have responded to this by cutting prices or by flooding the market with cheaper entry points to defend volume. Some brands would have done exactly that, and slowly degraded their own positioning in the process. What makes this significant is not the Philippines specifically, it is what the decision represents. The willingness to close something that is not working, even if it bruises the ego, even if it feeds bad headlines, is exactly the kind of discipline that distinguishes companies that survive long cycles from companies that do not. There are brands right now holding on to markets they should have exited years ago. paying rent on boutiques that generate foot traffic but no real profit, protecting legacy presence for reasons that are more about pride than numbers. Casio looked at the Philippines and said, "The numbers do not work. We are out." That sounds cold. In practice, it is respect for what the business actually is versus what it used to be. The next decision was about a product category Casio practically invented, and then had to admit it could no longer save. The dictionary funeral. X word discontinued. February 2025. Casio officially stopped developing new hardware for its X word series. If you grew up in East Asia, or studied Japanese, or were ever a student trying to navigate a second language in the era before smartphones, you probably know what an electronic dictionary is. A small, clamshell device with a tiny keyboard, a library of definitions, grammar rules, and pronunciation guides in your pocket before your pocket had a computer in it. Casio built some of the best ones in the world. The X-Word line was a genuine achievement, serious hardware for serious learners. At its peak, these devices were standard equipment in classrooms across Japan, China, and Korea. There is a specific memory attached to these devices for an entire generation of language learners. The weight of it in a school bag. The particular click of the keys, slightly stiff, deliberate, nothing like typing on a phone. Looking up a word mid-conversation and reading the definition off a screen the size of a playing card, it was slow by today's standards, but it was also, in its own way, an act of commitment. You carried the device because you were serious about learning. The device signaled something about the person using it. In Japanese high schools and universities, the X-Word was not just a tool, it was infrastructure. Teachers recommended specific models, and parents bought them as the start of school year gift. Certain editions were passed from older siblings to younger ones, like a hand-me-down that still had value. The product had genuine cultural weight in the markets it served. And then the smartphone arrived. Not quickly, not all at once, but steadily, relentlessly, the app replaced the device. Why carry a dedicated dictionary when the one in your phone is more current, more connected, and free? Casio's official reasoning for discontinuing the line was honest: smartphone dominance and falling birth rates. Those two forces combined to make a business case that simply could not be argued with. Fewer students. Fewer reasons for those students to buy dedicated hardware. A market that had not so much collapsed as gently, completely evaporated. Falling birth rates is the detail that does not get enough attention in the coverage of this decision. Electronic dictionaries live or die on student populations, and Japan's student population has been shrinking for years, a demographic reality with no short-term fix and no workaround. Even if Casio had built the greatest electronic dictionary ever made, the pool of likely buyers was getting smaller every year, regardless. The smartphone killed the category from one side, and demographics killed it from the other. Casio was fighting two battles it could not win. The dictionary funeral is a strange kind of grief, because nobody did anything wrong. The product was good, and the brand built it well. The customers moved on anyway, because something better came along that cost them nothing extra. What Casio deserves credit for is not pretending. There was no limited edition revival, no rebranding exercise, no press release about reimagining the dictionary experience. They looked at the category, confirmed what the numbers already knew, and stepped away. There is a word for that kind of decision. It is discipline, and it is rarer than it should be. What came next is an entire business division that Casio didn't just downsize. It was walked away from entirely. The cash register graveyard walk into a small shop in Japan in 1995. Behind the counter, almost certainly, a Casio cash register. Compact, reliable, exactly what a neighborhood business needed. The system equipment division was not glamorous work, but it was consistent. It was bread and butter. By 2025, it was a discontinued business. Casio's system equipment segment, which included electronic cash registers and handheld terminals, was formally reclassified. Not restructured, not merged into another division. Discontinued. The language matters because it is not the language of a company optimizing an underperforming unit. It is the language of a company that decided a category had reached its logical conclusion. And the category had. Point-of-sale hardware has moved almost entirely to software, tablets, cloud-based systems, and integrated payment platforms. The physical cash register, as a dedicated piece of hardware, is an artifact. A well-built one, but an artifact. The hardware cash register did not fail because it stopped working. It failed because the job it was built to do got absorbed into something else. An iPad running Square, a phone tap, and a QR code. The transaction still happens, it just does not need a dedicated machine anymore. The function survived, but the form did not. The handheld terminal business followed the same logic. Warehouse inventory management, delivery tracking, and retail stock systems, all of this migrated to software running on commercial hardware. The specialized handheld terminal, built and maintained by a company like Casio, became harder and harder to justify when a standard tablet with the right app did the same job. The transition happened across the 2025 and 2026 fiscal years, part of a pivot towards software and, interestingly, medical imaging. Two directions that share almost nothing with the cash register business except the engineering precision required to do them well. That pivot to medical imaging is worth pausing on because it sounds surprising until you think about what Casio has always actually been good at. Precision optics, display technology, and miniaturized electronics that perform reliably under demanding conditions. These are not skills specific to a watch or a calculator, they are transferable. A company that can engineer a watch to survive being dropped from height, submerged in water, and exposed to temperature extremes has a certain kind of competence that medical imaging equipment also requires. Casio is not inventing a new capability, it is redirecting an existing one. That redirection is the part of this story that almost never gets told. Because the narrative of Casio is closing things is easier than the narrative of Casio is moving its engineering competence into higher margin, more technically demanding territory. The first fits in a headline. The second requires actually understanding what Casio is and what it has always been good at. The cash register graveyard is not a sad place. It is a cleared lot. Casio looked at what was built on it, decided it had served its purpose, and started thinking about what to build next. Next is the 600 names. People, not numbers. The story behind the layoffs is not what most headlines made it. The layoffs nobody is framing correctly. 600 people, that number traveled, it got attached to different claims, 600 stores, 600 products, 600 locations. It mutated the way numbers do when they pass through enough hands without enough context. The actual story. Casio implemented a voluntary retirement program across 2025, reducing its global workforce by approximately 600 people. The company absorbed a 7 billion yen extraordinary loss to fund the restructuring. These were not mass firings. They were structured exits, offered to employees as the company reorganized around a narrower, more focused version of itself. Voluntary retirement programs are often described as humane restructuring. That framing softens something that is genuinely difficult. There are 600 people for whom this was not an abstract business decision but a real disruption to their working lives. That reality deserves to sit alongside the strategic language. Picture who some of those 600 people might have been. The product manager who spent 12 years developing new X-Word models, someone who knew the device category better than almost anyone alive, whose entire professional expertise was built around a product line that no longer had a future. The regional operations coordinator who had managed Casio's Southeast Asian distribution network for a decade, whose job description evaporated the moment the Philippines exit was signed off. The cash register service engineer who had spent years learning a hardware ecosystem that was being classified as discontinued. These are not bad workers. They are workers whose roles exist to support things that no longer exist. That is the part of restructuring that the business press tends to abstract into percentages and balance sheet entries. Behind every percentage point of workforce reduction is a person recalculating their professional identity. The voluntary nature of the program creates a particular kind of grief that is hard to name. It is not the clean anger of being fired. It is something more complicated, the recognition that the company is not doing badly, that your colleagues are not being let go, that the business has simply decided it no longer needs the thing you are best at. You can take the package or stay in a role that is being wound down. Neither option is the one you wanted. 600 people made that calculation and took the package. Most of them were probably right too. The financial briefings in May 2025 and February 2026 framed this clearly. The extraordinary loss was not an accident. It was a deliberate investment in getting leaner, absorbing the pain of restructuring up front rather than bleeding it out slowly over years of underperforming segments dragging down the rest of the business. There is a version of corporate restructuring that looks like cowardice, dressed as strategy, cutting people, claiming efficiency, and protecting margins without actually changing anything fundamental about the business. Casio's version is different because the cuts follow decisions, not the other way around. The Philippines was exited first. The dictionary was discontinued first. The cash register division was classified as discontinued first. The workforce reduction is the consequence of those moves, not the justification for them. The sequence matters. It tells you whether the restructuring is strategic or just opportunistic cost-cutting. One more thing about the 600 that rarely gets said: this number will not grow indefinitely. The restructuring has a shape and a logic. The divisions being wound down are finite. The roles attached to those divisions are finite. When the cuts are done, what remains is a company built around the things Casio actually chose, not the things it inherited and never quite figured out what to do with. The 600 is not the beginning of an endless contraction. It is the cost of reaching a defined destination. 600 names, real people. And the reason they lost their positions connects directly to the decisions already made and the direction Casio is now determined to move. Which brings us to what Casio is actually building. A strategy with a name, a target, and a timeline. What Casio is actually building. The document is called Basic Policy for 2030. That title alone tells you something. Most companies manage in quarters. Casio is thinking in years, specifically, the 5 years between now and the end of this decade, and what the company should look like when it gets there. The core of the strategy is a shift toward direct-to-consumer selling and e-commerce. By 2026, e-commerce accounts for somewhere between 16 and 20% of Casio's sales in key markets like Japan and Europe. That number will grow. The plan is to grow it intentionally. What does that mean in practice? It means less reliance on wholesale partners and third-party retailers, less dependence on physical boutique presence, more control over pricing, customer relationships, and brand perception. When you sell directly, you know exactly who is buying, what they are paying, and what they come back for. That last part is more powerful than it sounds. Wholesale distribution is efficient at volume but blind on detail. When Casio sells through a department store or a third-party retailer, the transaction completes and the customer relationship ends at the point of sale. Casio knows how many units moved. It does not know who bought them, why they chose that model over another, whether they were a first-time buyer or a collector, or whether they will be back. Direct-to-consumer changes all of that. Every online purchase is a data point. Accumulated across thousands of transactions, those data points build a picture of the actual Casio customer, not the assumed one. The assumed customer and the actual customer are often very different. Brands operating primarily through wholesale frequently discover, when they finally get direct data, that the person buying their product is not the person they thought they were marketing to. The age is different. The motivation is different. The other brands in the customer's life are different. Casio, building out its direct channel, is in the process of finding out who is actually buying, and that knowledge will shape every product decision that follows. That picture is increasingly useful if you are trying to make the premium pivot work. You cannot sell a $500 metal G-Shock to a customer you have never met through a retail channel that treats your product the same way it treats a phone case. Premium products require premium context. They require the brand to control the environment in which the customer first encounters them, understands them, and decides to buy. Online direct selling, done well, creates that environment. The online pivot also reduces costs in ways that compound over time. Every wholesale relationship that gets replaced by a direct online sale is margin that stays inside the business. Every boutique that closes, especially in markets where the return does not justify the rent, is overhead that disappears. This is the economics underneath the strategy. A Casio watch sold through a department store yields Casio a fraction of the retail price. The retailer takes its margin, the wholesaler takes theirs, logistics takes another slice. A Casio watch sold through Casio's own online store yields the full retail price minus only the cost of shipping and platform fees. At scale, that difference is enormous. It is the difference between a business that needs volume to survive and a business that can sustain itself on quality. 16 to 20% sounds modest, but it represents a direction more than a destination. The logic of the whole restructuring, closing markets, cutting product lines, and reducing headcount flows toward this. Casio is streamlining its operations so that when customers engage with the brand, they engage with Casio directly. There is a version of this story that sounds like retreat. A company pulling back, going smaller, getting quiet. That is not what is happening. The online pivot is infrastructure for something more ambitious. At the end of all this cutting, there is something Casio has decided to protect. And it reveals what the company actually believes its future is worth. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. You walk into a store or browse online, and everything looks the same, but behind the scenes, there's a system. Prices aren't always fair, availability is controlled, and one bad decision can leave you overpaying for something that doesn't even hold its value. That's why I created a complete free insider guide to buying watches. Inside, you'll find the best watches to buy, the watches to avoid, and how to choose a watch that actually fits your style and budget long-term. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the free guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. The G-Shock play. Why the future is metal and expensive. The G-Shock was born in 1983 from a simple idea. Build a watch that a developer could drop from a 3-story building onto concrete and still have it work. It took Kikuo Ibe over 200 prototypes to solve that problem. What he built became one of the most recognizable watch designs in the world. Durable, bold, culturally loaded. The G-Shock was worn by military personnel, surfers, skateboarders, and eventually fashion editors. It sat comfortably in the $200 range and sold to people who genuinely needed it, and people who just wanted to feel like they did. That story is not over. It is, in fact, the center of everything Casio is doing right now. But here is where the strategy gets specific and where most coverage misses the point. Casio is not betting on the G-Shock in general. It is betting on a particular version of the G-Shock, the full metal case editions, the limited collaborations, the pieces that command $500 and above. The resin body entry-level G-Shock is not being discontinued, but it is also not the future the company is building toward. The future is the customer who walks into the conversation already knowing what they want, already prepared to pay for it, already invested in the culture around it. That customer exists. The G-Shock has one of the most committed collector communities in watchmaking, not the Swiss luxury space, but something adjacent and arguably more interesting. People who own 40 G-Shocks. People who track limited releases the way sneakerheads track drops. People who can tell you the case dimensions of a DW5600 versus a GA2100 without looking it up. This community is not large by mass market standards, but it is deep, it is loyal, and it spends consistently. The selection and concentration strategy, Casio's internal framing for this entire restructuring period, is built around a specific bet. That the future of the brand lives in high-margin, premium hardware, not the resin body G-Shock that costs $150, the full metal case editions, the limited collaborations, the pieces that sit above $500 and justify every cent of it through materials, craft, and cultural weight. The ClassPad platform, educational software for mathematics, is the other pillar. A software business carries margins that physical hardware almost never can. Combined with a premium hardware strategy, these two directions form a business that looks very different from a company selling cash registers and electronic dictionaries in the Philippines. ClassPad is worth explaining because it sounds like an odd companion to a premium. Watch strategy until you understand what it actually is. ClassPad.net is a cloud-based mathematics platform, the digital evolution of the graphic calculator business Casio has been in for decades. The graphic calculator is another piece of dedicated hardware under pressure from software alternatives, and ClassPad is Casio's answer. Instead of defending the physical calculator, build the software ecosystem that replaces it, own the platform, and capture the margin that software allows. It is the same logic applied to education that the G-Shock play applies to lifestyle. Move up the value chain, control the experience, own the relationship. Here is the observation that rarely gets made in coverage of this restructuring. Casio is not trying to compete with Rolex or Patek Philippe. It is not going luxury in the traditional sense. What it is doing is something more precise. It is filtering its own customer base. The moves of the last 2 years, taken together, tell budget customers and wholesale buyers that Casio is not optimizing for them anymore. The brand is orienting itself toward the customer who will pay more, buy less often, and keep the product for longer. That filtering is invisible to most casual observers but completely legible if you watch the pattern. Every category Casio has exited shared the same characteristic: low margin, high volume, commoditized. Every category Casio is doubling down on shares the opposite characteristic: defensible margin, committed buyer, product that justifies its price not through branding alone but through genuine capability. This is not a brand reinvention. It is a brand subtraction, removing everything that does not belong to the story Casio wants to tell about itself. Every discontinued product line, every market exit, every boutique that closes. These are not losses. They are the removal of noise from around a signal Casio has decided to amplify. Whether it works depends on execution, on how well the metal G-Shock continues to hold cultural relevance, and on whether the direct-to-consumer model delivers the margins the strategy promises. None of that is guaranteed. There is a version of this that goes wrong. If the premium G-Shock loses its cultural credibility, if it starts appearing in the wrong contexts, getting discounted in the wrong channels, being worn by the wrong ambassadors, the premium positioning evaporates faster than it was built. Luxury-adjacent brands live and die on perception. Casio has to manage not just what it sells, but what it is seen as. That is a harder job than making a good watch, and it never stops. There is also a version of this that goes exactly right. The G-Shock becomes what the strategy intends, a watch that sits in a category of its own, neither mass market nor traditional luxury, but something with a more durable kind of credibility. The credibility of a tool that earns its price. The collector who pays $600 for a full metal G-Shock in 2026 is not buying a status symbol. They are buying the outcome of 40 years of engineering refinement. That is a story Casio can tell. The question is whether it can tell it loudly enough and to the right people, without the wholesale distribution that used to carry the message for it. But the plan is coherent. And coherence, in a business transformation, is rarer than it looks. So, is Casio closing hundreds of stores? Not exactly. What Casio is doing is something more considered and more difficult. It is deciding, category by category, market by market, what it is willing to be. The electronic dictionary is gone because the smartphone won. The cash register division is gone because the software won. The Philippines presence is gone because the numbers did not justify it. The 600 jobs are gone because those roles existed to support things that no longer exist. And all of it points toward the same destination, a leaner, more direct, more premium version of a brand that has survived longer than most of its competitors by knowing when to change and when to hold. The rumor got the facts wrong, but it picked up on something real. Casio is not the same company it was 5 years ago. The transformation is genuine. The question that remains is whether cutting away everything it used to be is enough to reveal what it is trying to become. The G-Shock is still being dropped from 3 stories onto concrete. It still works. The question is whether the business built around it is being engineered with the same care. If you found this worth watching, the like button helps more people find it. And if this kind of deep dive is what you are here for, subscribe. There is a lot more coming.